Well, good afternoon. My name is Dominique Hogan-Doran. I'm a member of the board and acting chair of Natural Hazards Research Australia. I want to welcome you to our National Research Showcase here at Parliament House. I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples who are the traditional custodians of the Canberra area, and I pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today. I'm told I have to give a few housekeeping notes. Exits are clearly marked, toilets are located just outside, and the session, most importantly, will run for about an hour and a half, and we do invite you to join us afterwards for networking and refreshments. So we are delighted to welcome researchers, practitioners, emergency leaders and community partners here today as we focus on strengthening Australia's resilience to natural hazards through evidence, collaboration and shared learning. These research showcases are an important opportunity to convene Australia's leading natural hazards researchers, policymakers and emergency management agency representatives. Today's program highlights the essential applied research that we do designed to safeguard our communities. I'd especially like to acknowledge our Canberra-based collaborators and representatives of the Centre's participant organisations in the audience. I'm probably supposed to stick to the script, but one of the great things about NHRA is we move around the country and we meet with the collaborators in each of the states and territories, and it's one of the great highlights of the work we do as members of the board. This afternoon you will hear from researchers and end users working together to deliver actionable, locally relevant and nationally significant insights. These presentations will be followed by a panel session where you will have the opportunity to ask questions of our researchers. And I want to now invite Dr. Jill Charker, who's the Deputy Coordinator General Disaster Resilience and Recovery at NEMA, who will be delivering our opening address.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see some familiar faces and some whom I've not yet met here this afternoon. It's a real privilege for me, representing NEMA, to join you here at this really important get-together. I too, before I start, would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on here this evening, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I particularly extend those respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues who might be here with us as well this evening. From the outset, I would like to recognise Natural Hazards Research Australia and the role that it plays in strengthening Australia's evidence base for natural hazard resilience and disaster risk reduction. As many of you would know, NHRA was established to be a trusted and independent voice working with governments, emergency managers, industry and the community to ensure that the important activities it undertakes do respond to national stakeholder needs. At NEMA, we highly value research that translates into practical action in order to support better decision making and research that can be applied to improve disaster preparedness, response and recovery. We also recognise and value diverse perspectives in research, including the deep and continuing connection of First Nations Australians to country. And those perspectives are really quite essential in supporting a culturally informed approach to emergency management. So the showcase this evening provides a valuable platform for all of us to share in new insights in research and innovation, and importantly to connect researchers, practitioners and policymakers across our nation. And it is of course by working together that we can support the development of safer, more resilient communities. As many of you will be well aware, we are witnessing a rise in national scale crises that are increasingly complex and globally interconnected. And it's in that context that collaboration and evidence that can be applied in the real world become even more important. Across recent seasons, we have seen the impacts of multiple hazards, cyclones, flooding, bushfires, often occurring concurrently across jurisdictions and with cascading consequences for both communities as well as for essential services. In working with NHRA, we are able to better understand and respond to these challenges, as seen in some of the recent events in the last season, which I know have touched many in this room, such as ex-tropical cyclone Narelle, which of course crossed multiple jurisdictions in the north of our country, major flooding in Queensland and the Northern Territory, and persistent bushfire risks in Victoria. And it's in those moments that, in fact, the value of collaborative research and advocacy becomes the most apparent. Can I briefly touch on the importance of research for both researchers and for practitioners? Research, of course, as I said, plays a critically important role in supporting emergency management and disaster risk reduction. As our risk environment shifts, our knowledge and our approaches must be able to keep pace. A key part of NEMA's engagement with NHRA is connecting research to real-world decision-making so that evidence can be applied in policy and planning and operations. In practical terms, we work really closely with NHRA as it sets its biennial research plans and identifies priority areas for research, including those priorities which become apparent after disaster events. This helps to ensure that the NHRA's research is not only aligned with priorities, but also delivers insights which are practical and actionable, as well as tools and guidance for Australian communities. I'd also like to note that beyond the research that NHRA commissions, it is events like the annual National Hazards Research Forum coming up in June, NHRA awards to recognise research impact, webinars on recent disaster events and innovations, and showcases just like today, which are part of that translation effort, bringing researchers and communities together so that evidence can be understood and tested and applied. So if you are a researcher here tonight, can I call out 3 actions that are going to be crucial and remain crucial for you to undertake work that can be accessed, digested and applied by practitioners? 1, of course, first, engage stakeholders early. Forums like this and many others that NHRA convenes or supports allow researchers to work closely with emergency services, government agencies and community representatives during research design at those very early formative stages and implementation to ensure that your questions, methods and outcomes address critical needs in disaster preparedness, response and recovery. Second, clear communication of findings is a timeless strategy to help practitioners from diverse fields of practice get value from your work. So translating research results into practical guidance, operational checklists, scenario-based briefings and other products that are easily understandable and actionable by emergency managers and frontline responders help communicate the value of your work in a form that practitioners can access and put to use. Third, encouraging opportunities for knowledge exchange. NHRA, of course, creates many regular opportunities, such as forums like this, as I said, such as conferences, workshops, roundtables, for two-way knowledge sharing between researchers and those responsible for decision-making and practice across all stages of the emergency management continuum. And secondly, for those who are here tonight who are emergency management practitioners thinking about research, 3 areas to maintain a focus on in order to best leverage research include the importance of building partnerships with researchers. Forums like this, again, do create the space for you to actively understand and seek collaboration with academic and research institutions and the researchers, which are the lifeblood of those organisations, to again ensure that the challenges that you identify, live with and try to solve, lessons learned from real events and context-specific needs do inform those researchers' ongoing agendas. Secondly, leveraging your sector networks. You know, there is a genuine opportunity for practitioners to work with NHRA as well as in your own interagency forums, professional associations, to access the latest research, exchange insights with your peers and identify best practices in emergency management. And finally, build critical appraisal skills in your teams so that they in turn can also consume research as an informed user. Invest in training and resources that support people to assess research validity, reliability and relevance, equipping your teams to in turn confidently interpret and apply new evidence and innovations in complex environments. And of course, NHRA does provide a series of resources to help with this, like knowledge modules, like hazard briefing notes and other resources to help a new practitioner in the field rapidly get up to speed. So finally, I'd like to congratulate NHRA for hosting another research forum here this evening. It is a chance to see some of the high quality work in the research field that has been undertaken, and tonight, importantly, see how it has subsequently translated to practitioners and other users of research. I encourage you all to enjoy the presentations and the ideas, insights, and the collaborative spirit that I know will define our sessions this evening. I look forward to us all continuing to work together, guided by research, partnership, and a shared vision to pave the way for safer, more resilient, and sustainable futures. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I must have been getting around long enough now that I recognise a lot of faces, so it's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks, Andrew, for the invite. Also, I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of Canberra and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here as well. I did a little bit of research, and as per normal, because NRHA is here and AFAC's here, we've turned on the cold weather, watch out tomorrow and Friday. We do it for the memorial especially for the Queenslanders. And Darwin people, of course. It's generally a pleasure to be in a room where people understand that natural hazards aren't abstract concepts or neat research questions. They're lived experiences. They're operational realities. They're the phone calls at 2 a.m, the decisions with imperfect information, and the weight of responsibility that doesn't go away once our headlines do. I want to acknowledge the environment we're all operating in right now, tied to fiscal settings, competing priorities, shorter notice, and more scrutiny. Sometimes as leaders, we're asked to do more with less, and to explain why something that doesn't carry flashing lights or turn out gear still matters. So today I want to talk about why research and innovation matter even more in this environment today, and why despite everything, we are generally better prepared than we were before. We're not perfect, we're not finished, but we're better. There's sometimes a story or a thought we put towards ourselves about the us and them. So operational agencies are over here and researchers are over there. One group focused on response, the other one focused on reflection and continuous improvement. But that framing doesn't hold up anymore, if it ever did. Research is not something that happens after the fire, the flood or the storm. It's happening during, before and increasingly ahead of time, shaping the decisions we make when the pressure is on. When it works well, the line between research and operations almost disappears. That's why partnerships like those with Natural Hazards Research Australia matter. Not as an academic exercise, but as a capability multiplier for people who stand on the fireground, manage coordination centres, or make calls with incomplete information, but full accountability. History shows us something consistent. In times of stress, we innovate. We're seeing that right now globally. Conflict zones like Ukraine and Iran have accelerated the use of drones, AI-supported intelligence, autonomous sensing, and resilience communications. Not because their budgets are generous, but because necessity made innovation unavoidable. Emergency management is no different. Tragedy, pressure, and complexity has driven us to find better ways of doing what we do. Not because we enjoy change, because stagnation costs lives. We say we used to do this and we used to do that. We reminisce and sometimes forget that many of our current capabilities were born from lessons learned the hard way, through loss, through inquiry, and then through research. Innovation in our world is not shiny, it's practical, it's almost invisible, and it saves lives quietly. So sometimes I get a question from people with curiosity, and I ask this question for myself as well. How far as a commissioner am I from having the technology from being able to detect, gather intelligence, initiate an operational response to a bushfire with no human in the decision chain? What's the honest answer? It's probably not as far away as we think, but not so close as some fear. We already use automated detection, we already rely on predictive modelling, we already trust AI-supported intelligence for fire behaviour and plume modelling and forecasting and fire line intensity. What matters is not whether humans are in or out of the loop, but whether research gives us the confidence, the transparency and the accountability as these systems mature. And that confidence only comes from evidence. One of the strongest arguments that I get for research and for continued investment, especially under a fiscal pressure, is proof of impact. Take the evolution locally of the Community Fire Units project, jointly submitted with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, is now under Wave NHRA. This isn't theoretical, it's asking some hard questions. Are our models consistent? Are we equitable in who gets access to local capability? Do sea views remain seasonal? Do they evolve into a year-round resilience assets? This research will shape policy, funding decisions and community safety outcomes across jurisdictions. That is research earning its place at the table. The same is true for flood research undertaken during the 22-23 events. Community experiences weren't just documented, they influenced recovery policy, funding settings, insurance conversations and SES public messaging. This is not research sitting on a shelf, this is research changing outcomes. In Canberra locally, in the media, I often get asked, are we ready for the next bushfire season and are we better prepared than before? My answer is yes. We have warning systems, AFDRS, bushfire attack zones, other building codes and standards. All these place us in a stronger position than we were 2 decades ago. But we can't let apathy be our enemy. Research into warning, timings, frequency and clarity matters because confusion can cost time and time costs lives. The work on flood messaging and other guidelines is a perfect example of how small refinements deliver enormous real-world benefits. And inclusion matters too. AI-enabled translation of emergency warnings for culturally and linguistic diverse communities won't be a nice to have, it's for a safer capability. More people understanding warnings means more people acting early and fewer people at risk. Canberra, we've heard the lessons the hard way from 2003 bushfires, and the bushfire behaviour research continues to fundamentally change our operational posture. From smoke modelling, improved fire line intensity modelling, these tools don't remove uncertainty, they reduce surprise. They allow safer decisions for firefighters and better protection for our communities. And again, this is where research earns trust, because when budgets tighten, leaders will rightly ask, what's the return on investment? The evidence has to be And the answer has to be evidence, not just our enthusiasm. Here's an uncomfortable truth that I'm facing at the moment. In an era of fiscal constraint, research is often seen as discretionary. But in reality, research is how we prove that investment saves money, that capability reduces loss, and that preparedness is cheaper than recovery. Research allows us to demonstrate real efficiencies, smarter allocation, and better outcomes. It's how we earn the right to ask the public for money and how we can be trusted with it. As emergency leaders, we don't ask for blind faith from our communities. We ask for trust, and the trust is built on evidence. I just want to finish where I started. We're not done. We don't have all the answers, and the hazards we are getting are not getting smaller or simpler. But through tragedy, inquiry, research, innovation, we're better than we were before. Better detection, better warnings, better engagement, and better decisions. That progress didn't happen by accident. It happened because people in rooms like this chose to lean forward over complacency and evidence over assumptions. So thank you for the research that informs, challenges and sharpens us. Thank you for the partnerships that blur the lines between us and them. And thank you for helping ensure that even in tight times, we continue to invest wisely in the safety of our communities. Thanks.
I'd like to start by acknowledging Matt Pluchinski, who's collaborated with me on this project, and he's available to answer all the difficult questions at the end. We're not actually started yet. Here we go. And also I have some colleagues at University of Wollongong that also gave me some technical support, the two Michaels. So this project really came about through the impetus of the Royal Commission inquiry and the New South Wales inquiry into the 2019-20 bushfires, which both recommended research into the effectiveness of aerial firefighting. The problem statement, or why we might do this, is first of all, that aerial firefighting is the most expensive component of operational firefighting, or effective fire risk management overall. But to evaluate it, report it, to understand how it works best, you need to have good understanding of three fundamental components, which at the moment we do not have. and that is what are the objectives. So that is, what were you trying to achieve with these with this aerial suppression? What was actually done? What was dropped? Where was it dropped? When was it dropped? And the outcome, which is what effect did it have on the fire behaviour? So that's essentially what we're trying to do using aerial drop data and trying to match that with a bunch of other different ancillary data to understand those three questions. We actually broke this down into 5 components. I'm not going to tell you about all of them because we don't have a lot of time. But the first thing Matt did a literature review to understand what is already known about this topic. And it turns out that there hasn't really been a lot of research into operational firefighting. A lot of it is from what there is from the United States and a bit from Australia. And I think that there's still a lot we don't know. But one thing that probably does stand out is that initial attack is very good when you use aircraft. The second part of it was a use study, which was to take all the drop data, which I'll tell you about in a minute, to understand, basically cross-check it against all different combinations to see how aircraft are used in this country, different conditions, different types of aircraft, and that sort of thing. The third thing was a survey of practitioners, also that Matt did, which is to ask a bunch of people who actually work in aerial firefighting what their best use is, what they're not very good for, and whether there's any levels of misunderstanding between different levels of operation. The fourth one was reconstruction, and this is where we're really getting into this question of trying to match those 3 points of the triangle. So Matt's done a lot of work for particular fires where he extracts the drops, talks to the people who are actually on that fire to understand why they were doing it, and also talk to them and also use other information like videos, aerial videos, to understand what effect it has on fire behaviour. And the last component there is the spatial analysis of effectiveness, which was my component, where we're essentially seeing if we can automate a process for all the 200,000 drops to see whether we can measure effectiveness that way. So the data we're using, so this is 5 years of the national data set, ARENA data set. It's had 245,000 drops. They were from 200 different aircraft. And we also match those with dispatch records that are also in the ARENA database. And the objective then is to match that information to things about the fires, the operational reports about what was being done, what the weather was, what the topography was, and what the vegetation was. So here's an example of a fire, the Bayshore Fire 2013 in northeastern New South Wales. So those are the drops coloured by the actual aircraft. And just to give you one, and that's overlaid on the actual fire, and just to give you one example of operational data, this is an intelligence log that was geo-referenced from about an hour after what it said is this little report says there were 2 lat drops, that's retardant drops, and basically we know now that they were to support a 20-metre wide dozed fire break. So if you know that sort of information, you've got a much better handle on why it was done and how effective it was. Unfortunately, that sort of information is gold dust. It happens very, very rarely. So the problems we have is there's big holes in the data. So there's a lot of missing aircraft. We estimate that at least half of the aircraft that are used in firefighting are not having their drops tracked. We find that it's quite rare to know what the objective was even when you do have a recorded drop. As I'll show in a minute, we can automate certain geographic information systems ways of matching outcomes, but whether those outcomes are actually relevant to what was being done is another question. So I'll just go through a few of these different aspects. So first, the use study. So Matt worked out how the different aircraft are used across different jurisdictions and environmental conditions, etc. So just one, there's loads and loads of graphs that came out of this process, but one example is that the dominant fire aircraft type is medium helicopters, type 2s, such as that one there. So they really are the dominant role in the fleet. Another thing is that larger aircraft tend to be used in worse fire weather conditions. So this graph is a little bit confusing, but if you look at the black bar in the center of the white thing, that is the median fire weather, and it's showing that the heavier aircraft on the left-hand side tend to be used at higher fire weather. The next part is case studies. So as I said, this is where Matt was able to get the drop data. You can see there is all the points. He talked to the air attack supervisors and others to understand why those drops were put in those particular places. And then he was able to verify that with videos and also discussions to work out what actually happened. So just as an example, all those yellow dots were all very effective. On the top right-hand side, there was a load of retardant drops, which were sort of very defensive to protect houses, but the fire never got there. So some of the things that Matt found through his case studies were the objectives relating to delaying the fire spread and property protection were the most common. So those blue bars, the big one there is the objective was to delay the fire spread, not to stop it. He also found that 92% of the drops actually met their objectives, and the ones that didn't, these are ones in orange in that graph, most common when they were trying to stop the fire, and most common when the fire weather was bad. So this is a map of the fire danger index. In red, those are the ones that failed to meet their objectives, and what you can see is predominantly they tend to be in much worse weather. 15% of drops were also in mop-up operations, so they were not directly trying to influence the fire behaviour. They were done after the fact. Then it comes to my spatial analysis, and this is where we're trying to automate the process of detecting the outcome. The first thing I should say about this is that we use the principle of drop clusters. So you can think of a drop cluster as a task. So your evaluation isn't against every individual drop, but a group of drops, because that's how they actually work. So you can do GIS operations to work out various different things, but what we've done here is to work out, for each of those clusters you see on that map over a fire, what proportion of the fire burnt right through them. And so you can see in the light blue coloured ones, the fire didn't burn through at all. So you can say they're involved in containment of the fire. And then you've got these pink ones where the fire essentially burned completely through them. So on this basis, you would say that that was a failure. But the problem with this method, this method works really well. You can do thousands of clusters in minutes. But the problem is you don't know that one that failed. You don't know whether its objective was to stop the fire in any case. Most likely it wasn't. And that's the bit, we can't link the two parts up very well. We can also do these kinds of operations with different objectives. So we can find out whether they reduce fire severity. We can find out whether they were next to houses that did or didn't get saved in the fire. And then I'll just give you some examples from that analysis. Basically, if you look on the left-hand graph, about 38% of these clusters tended to be on the fire boundary, and it didn't really matter much what type of aircraft it was. And on the right-hand side, it looks like when retardant is used, they're a bit more likely to be on the boundary to be containing. I also did a whole lot of statistical analysis to see what weather conditions and fire sizes were more likely to lead to successful containment. But I'm not showing that because at the end of the day, it's not particularly useful if we haven't been able to match the objective if they weren't trying to contain it, there's not a lot of point trying to prove how well they contained it. So I'll just come to the end really, so future considerations. So I think we have to think about what you can do with case studies and what you can do with automatic effectiveness, which is broad scale. So case studies are great because that's the only way at the moment where we can actually understand what the objectives were, what was done, and what the outcome was. The problem is they're necessarily a small sample. They could even be a biased sample, and they take a very long time. On the other hand, the automatic effectiveness is very good in the sense of a statistical approach, and they're very complete, but we have this problem of not really understanding what was going on. So the outcome, the thing I wanted to leave you with is that we really do need better data to record what was done, why, and what the outcome was, so that this triangle can be fully understood. And really that's about making sure that all or as many as possible of the aircraft that are actually on the fires have tracking data on. They don't all. We actually think that about half of them. We also have a problem that about half of the drops in our data appeared to be in places where there was no fire, no mapped fire. So what we think is going on there is that there was a fire, but it's too small to have been mapped. And again, that makes it very difficult to do this kind of work if you don't have any information about what they were doing. This is all a big, and the other important thing, of course, is operations records should be the place where we can understand objectives and link them to these. But in general, we find that the language or the recording doesn't really match. So this is a big challenge. Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Hi, Rob Webb's my name. I was pretty nervous when Owen said to me at the start, do you know what we're doing in this project? And I went, I hope so. I've got to talk a little bit about it. Look, this has been a project that it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, just after the Royal Commission, that we're looking at how we deliver this through the leadership within the both the National Aerial Firefighting Centre Strategic Committee, working with NEMA about how we can change the game. From an AFAC point of view, who run NAFC, we do the procurement. We're looking for ways to put a lid on the increasing prices, increasing costs. If I go back to 2019-20, upwards of a bare minimum would have been $500 million spent on aerial firefighting. Since then, the costs globally have gone up probably 30%, and they're only going to keep going up. So we've got this problem that we don't have the money in our budgets. The leaders across the country don't have the money in their budgets, so we have to put downward pressure on how we're using them and using them in the most effective manner. We see this aerial firefighting fleet as a true mitigation. It's no different to a flood levy. We can't turn them on and off. We have to be able to maintain the right size capacity that has to deal with a day where there is no fires to a day that there might be 200 or 300 fires start, and we don't know which one. The fire and emergency services don't know which one to attack first. And the data problem, what is a bad problem now, we go back 10 years and we would have been crowing at how good it was that we put our foot forward and started a database that was tracking data. There's never been a time after 3/4 of my career in a science organisation, there was never enough data. But in 2026, data has never been so important, and the gap between what we can do and the data we have is ever widening. So as we look forward, and this project is a great example, there's not enough data, that means through the Aerial Firefighting Centre, we've got projects in place now to put in new procurement systems that can start to track the performance, that can start to look at the performance of different sensors on aircraft. We've got insights and dashboards being developed in Victoria that we will be putting out nationally to show the importance of tracking good information and trying to build common investment, the computer systems in our sector, to bring them up to the level they need to collect the national data sets. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But research like this shines a light on what is most important, where we have to be looking, and if that is the drop type, if that is the drop amount, if that's the type of retardant flowing out of the bottom, then that's where we need to focus. But collectively as a sector, it is one of the number one problems, is the changes in, or the need to make really difficult decisions with limited data. And as we build this up over time and we get the results of this, it just points us in the right direction. So the next time, in 10 years' time, we look back and we'll go, we still don't have enough data, but at least we might have saved another many billions of dollars because we have put our focus on the right areas of the country. So thanks to the team who are pulling this together, we have to take the step. And you think how little, there's only a small number of aerial firefighting planes in the world, so the data points are always going to be small, but the actual outcomes of these things are going to make a massive difference into the future. Sorry, Sarah. I'm going to stop there, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak. My name is Alex Howard. I'm from Phoenix, Australia, and I'll be followed shortly by Dr. Jazz Laws to talk about the project that we have been working on. I'd like to start first by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the lands that we meet upon today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to honour the strength of people with lived and living experience of trauma and mental ill health. Their voice has guided the work that we'll be presenting on today and guides all the work that we do at Phoenix, Australia, which is the National Centre of Excellence for Post-Traumatic Mental Health. So before I kind of go into what the research addressed, what the project addressed, just like to ask you to take a moment to imagine a firefighter returning from a series of call-outs across a summer of intense bushfires, or a police officer or a surf lifesaver facing incident after incident across their multi-year career. There might be a single tragedy or traumatic event that changes the course of that person's mental health, or there may be no single dramatic moment to point to. Could just be dozens or even hundreds of scenes that lodge in the memory of that person. A household loss, a person loss, a community devastated by disaster, or witnessing again and again the strain on their peers who are a fellow volunteer. And even if what we know that even if each event itself, the weight of that seems small, over months and years it can become a burden that can impact the way that someone feels, thinks, behaves, how they relate to their family, to their community, and to their colleagues and fellow volunteers. So we know that events like this, whether they be just individual potentially traumatic events or this impact of what we call cumulative trauma, they're now very well recognised as psychosocial hazards, and the obligations are very clear under newish workforce legislation. And we also know that emergency service workers and volunteers are exposed to potentially traumatic events far more frequently than people in a lot of other occupations. And we also know that exposure raises the risk of mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, substance use, and potentially post-traumatic stress disorder. So, given all of this, this is something that was obviously on the mind of AFAC Mental Health and Wellbeing Group. They identified a need for a reliable way to track exposure to traumatic events and the organisational responses they put in place after that, with the idea to help leaders make informed choices about prevention, early intervention, and building workforce resilience. So I think it's nicely described by an emergency service wellbeing lead from one of the organisations represented here. Cumulative trauma is a key psychosocial hazard within emergency services due to continued exposure to potentially traumatic events. It has proved to be a challenging task to measure, track and respond effectively to this risk, which is why systems are lacking across the sector. So it was with that problem that Phoenix Australia was lucky enough to be engaged to work with the Project Management Committee, NHRA and other industry partners to see what could be done about addressing this. So we conducted the research in 3 phases. As I guess we all do, we look first to figure out, well, what's considered best practice internationally. Let's have a look and see what is out there. I will admit that I had hoped that we would just find an article that just had all the answers laid out for us and be like, job done, thank you very much. But no, what we found is that there was a very strong call at the end of so many pieces of literature, so many policy pieces saying somebody should really look into tracking potentially traumatic events, would be really good, full stop. And I'm pretty sure that some of the colleagues at Phoenix Australia have probably ended articles with a similar call and a similar full stop afterwards. So we decided this is the time we're going to look into it more seriously. So then what we had to do, we had to look at, well, given that there's no international consensus, let's have a look and see what people are currently doing. The experts are people like you in the room. So we were able to collect information and survey people across Australia and internationally to get their thoughts on, well, what are you currently doing to track this as a psychosocial hazard risk, and what's working well and what's working not so well. Then we took all of that information and expertise that we had gathered and worked very closely with industry through various consensus building workshops, I guess we would say, to kind of present this information and say, we've got all of this information now. What do we do with this? How can we turn this into something that is useful for the sector, for the industry? So it was from those discussions and workshops that we developed good practice principles for tracking exposure to potentially traumatic events, and they are already publicly available. And then the phase that we're just coming to the end of now is, it's all very good and well to have this guidance there, but what can we do to help industry implement it in order to improve outcomes? So we've been working on a range of implementation tools that we're about ready to launch, but you'll hear from Jazz shortly about how they've been thinking about it. Without going into the detail of the whole set of principles, we found, kind of looking at the consensus within the industry, that there were some really key elements of a tracking system that seemed to be really important to consider and to fit to each organisation's context. So it sounds obvious, but it didn't seem like it was, from what we were finding, is to be really clear on the purpose of why are we tracking exposure to potentially traumatic events? What are we trying to learn from this or change as a result of it at the organisation level, at a team level, at an individual level? And then once we're clear on that, that obviously has implications for how you design your tracking system and how you implement it. And within the system itself, thinking really carefully about what is collected, making sure that we're, only collecting data that will be used. We're not just collecting data for the sake of data, kind of going to your point earlier that you need it to answer questions and to fill in gaps of knowledge, thinking about how data can be collected in a simple way, in a flexible way, with considerations of privacy, and really key how that data is being analysed and used. Because obviously it's really about data turning into action and informing decisions that's really important. So is it to help target training for proactive outreach, to support peer support programs? Is it giving information about what kind of wellbeing initiatives might be suitable given particular roles and their risk levels? And then what we've now gone and done is develop these implementation tools. So, and these will be available soon. Practice note, just providing a rationale for why you might want to consider this, a quick reference guide. One thing that Jazz will speak to more shortly is the audit, which is inviting organisations to look at what systems they have in place or what system they might be planning to put in place and think about how it aligns with best practice, with the idea there's no score that comes out as a result of it, but it's really to help people prioritise their next steps towards best practice. And I think a really, really great thing that we've been able to do is because we were lucky enough to have the AFAC Mental Health and Wellbeing Working Group endorse the guidelines. They have also agreed to monitor the uptake and implementation of the guidelines across the sector, with the hope that when someone goes to look at this topic in 5 or 10 years, they will no longer, Google won't let them down, that there'll be something out there that someone has found and thought and helped develop it. So why does this matter, or how might you use these guidelines? They've been developed to be used very flexibly by organisations, so it fits your context and needs. We didn't want to develop just another set of standards or anything too prescriptive. So it could be used to review or benchmark or improve your current system, could help you select or implement a new system, whether that be, low tech or high tech. We're kind of agnostic there in terms of what that is. I think really critically, it can help shape learning across the sector by bringing kind of a shared approach and shared language, so there can be some communication and sharing of that, because we know that one of the things, if we can have robust systems within workplaces to track exposure, then it will certainly help the agencies and the industry as a whole comply around legislation with psychosocial hazards, as well as lead to better outcomes for their staff and volunteers. And I think finally, a really key thing is that the idea of collecting this information is to help you better target investments to support wellbeing. Everyone's got finite budgets, finite resources, so thinking about where is the best place that I can be providing kind of support, or the initiatives that I can be putting in place. And here's an example of an organisation, a member of AFAC, who is currently looking at how to use these guidelines. So they were already developing a tool, and they've said we are now implementing the new tool with greater confidence that it will achieve its aim of identifying locations with the highest level of exposure to potentially traumatic events, enabling us to layer on additional psychoeducation, treatment and support. So it doesn't need to have been a profound, complicated thing that has come of it, but it has helped guide their decision making. So finally, and as I often end presentations when I'm talking about this, I would like to end with somewhat of an invitation to you all here. So this is, as far as we're aware, Australia has an opportunity to be a global leader in thinking about good practice guidance for tracking. There is nothing that we're aware of that exists, and we have had quite a bit of interest internationally as well because of the lack of thought beyond someone should look into it, but not me. So we really do have an opportunity now to be global leaders, to give more directed investment around wellbeing initiatives for emergency services. It also has implications for other high-risk industries where they're exposed to potentially traumatic events. But importantly, the guidance and the tools that we've developed aren't the end point of this project. We really do need your support. This is the invitation for you to test them, to try and break them, to collect feedback on their usefulness of what was important, what wasn't, so that we can share quickly amongst the sector what we're learning about tracking systems and hopefully advance the knowledge and practice in this area quite quickly. And I think it's particularly important given the number of climate-driven disasters and more frequent extreme events, there will be sustained higher demands on emergency services. And if by better understanding exposure to trauma, we can better target the support that we provide our workforces around prevention and well-being, it can help with better outcomes for individuals, teams, agencies, and Australia's sustained capability to respond to natural hazards. So shortly, I'll pass on to Dr. Jazz Laws from Australian Surf Lifesaving, but I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to share this work, and yeah, very happy to talk more about it across the evening. Thank you very much.
Huge thanks to Andrew and to Sarah for having me here and inviting me here, and also, of course, to Alex and David for all the hard work they've done, pulling this amazing work together. Surf Lifesaving has been really, I suppose, grateful and really happy to have been given the opportunity to actually help shape some of these tools and co-design some of them and try and break them with Alex and the team through the AFAC Mental Health Working Group. And before I talk about the guide, I suppose I really wanted to, that top bit of the model is all about organisational context. So a lot of people think surf lifesavers just play on the beach. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context about why we might be here and how we fit into this, this talk today. So we have 316 clubs around the country with over 200,000 members. A huge proportion of those actually patrol the beach. And I suppose as they do actually play an important role, an important part of our first responder fabric that we have here in Australia. Many of our services are within regional and remote areas, and they also play a double role as a huge community hub. But I suppose, what does this have to do with trauma? You can see on the screen we perform preventative actions and first aid treatments and lots of rescues each year, and this is estimated to be a cost of over $9 billion to the Australian community, and we do it all for free. In fact, we pay for the privilege. Our Surf Lifesavers, though, it's a community cause and a community group. So you can start in the movement from the age of 5, and you can actually start patrolling from the age of 13. So given that concept, and that we have on average 130 coastal drowning deaths around the country each year, you can also see that our members are, and can be, and in the supportive role they are to emergency services, actually play, also can be exposed to trauma as part, and potential traumatic events as part of their role. So just as an aside, because given the audience, we're talking about natural hazards, just a recent analysis that we conducted was looking at using cause of death data. I just wanted to highlight coastal drowning is often an outcome of natural hazards, and especially rip currents, and it's actually an increased frequency to those extreme events that we see. Has obviously much lower impacts on infrastructure. However, it still has serious impacts on our community and our responders and anybody involved. These columns here are cyclones, floods, fires over the last 10 years from the Australian Bureau of, this is outdoor fires, not indoor fires, and sharks and crocodiles. So you can see that they're, the impacts of rip currents, why they don't have the same, and this is not taking away from any of the horrific events and the impacts of the other natural hazards that after extreme events. These are everyday events that can occur, and they have significant impacts on our members and the community. So, back on track. Apologies for the tangent. But responding to these incidents does occur regularly. These two documents on the screen that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, they actually were the documents that spearheaded our understanding and mental health and how important it is to know what's going on for our emergency services. One of the big problems with this is that Surf Lifesaving was omitted from both of these and not considered. For us, though, this actually really got us inspired and drove us to start our own mental health project. and to understand the mental health of our members. I'm not going to go over this slide, but it's been an ongoing project where we've covered lots of information trying to understand what the impacts are for our members. So what we learnt so far, lots of outcomes. Basically, one of the key ones is that we've increased awareness greatly of surf lifesavers as first responders in general, and whether we're officially an emergency service or not, we do support traditional emergency services in many tragic incidents. Really proudly, a lot of this work has culminated in the development of a national wellbeing framework, which was launched at the end of last year. And the main, I suppose, ethos of this framework is how we can go as a movement to promote physical health promote mental health equally with physical health. So it's a more holistic approach for our members. So, enter the good practice guide. Okay, so really great working with Alex and the team on these practical tools, and it was nice to sort of test through. I've mainly focused on the audit alongside, which you use in conjunction with the guide itself. They're really practical tools that you can easily and flexibly apply to your situation and contextualise what you need. And I have no doubt that they'll be helpful for lots of different organisations to actually start thinking about or consider how they might track and measure potentially traumatic incidents. So as I explained, surf lifesaving was in some ways we were quite well progressed in trying to understand what our membership, the impacts of mental health and PTEs on our membership was. However, using the tools and piloting, particularly the audit tool, is what we're doing at the moment, has provided us with really great sense check, has been able to sort of show where we're going well, what we've done well, perhaps what we've missed, and perhaps what we could do a little bit better. And also it provides a different lens or a different perspective that I can take to my bosses and say, hey, we haven't considered this, or, particularly when we think about the psychosocial hazard in the workplace, what does that mean for us, and how can we ensure that we're doing the right thing for our members and looking after any risks that might come to the organisation as well. Some of the things that we've actually found is like having a clear vision. So, and also making sure you've got the right tools to achieve it. So we are currently using a survey, which is great, but we're only getting a small proportion of the patrolling membership. So is there a different way, an objective way that we can actually, through our patrolling statistics, that we can actually flag the potentially traumatic events? And so having this tool, we can actually sense check it all and check it off and see where we're at. And, it's a markup PDF that you can play with, so you can say that's not relevant for me, and you can really tailor it to your needs. And you can come back to it and say, okay, I've actually achieved that, or that's on the too hard basket for now. So you can, it's really helpful in that sense. So I'm just going to leave you with a couple of things. I suppose, as everyone's aware, the health of our workforce is, crucial if we're going to safeguard the services that we rely on and that they can provide. For surf lifesaving perspective, looking forward, this graph on the right is just a PhD student of ours. He presented us on last Thursday, so hot off the press. Basically, he's looking at beach visitation, what that looks like under predicted climate scenarios. So we're seeing in some parts of New South Wales at different times of the year, we're going to see a 40% increase in beach visitation, which is going to put significant pressure on our membership, on the services, and an increased likelihood of being, part of a traumatic incident, or, a traumatic rescue or a body retrieval. So I suppose don't underestimate the impact of these everyday natural hazards and the everyday impact on the community, and how that might impact on our mental health and physical well-being. In one of your great documents, the Be Ahead of Ready document, it says that we want to achieve a future where communities are safe, resilient and sustainable, with key priorities being resilient communities and workforce capabilities. The well-being and resilience is hand in hand with physical and mental health. We have to get that right. And tools like this help us track and monitor where we're going to make sure that we can see if we're moving in the right direction or if perhaps we need to pivot and try something new. So I just want to say this is our mental health research team during COVID, stuck on a screen, but they're all saying thank you to you guys as well for having us here today. And I really look forward to chatting to you guys further after.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present some of my research here today. My name is Julian Marx. I'm a lecturer of information systems at the University of Melbourne. And yeah, I've been researching the role of social media for crisis communication for maybe 8 years now. And I never run out of things to do because, you know, social media change rapidly, constantly, and the way things worked only a couple of years ago don't work the same way today. And yeah, in this talk, I want to present some findings from 2 events that I studied. But as an introduction, why this matters is that when you think back to the early days of Facebook and when Twitter was still a thing, was that the visibility of social media content, and specifically also warnings, of course, in our context, was determined by a social graph. So what I mean by that is, imagine you have your 50 friends on Facebook and you post something. Then the social media platform would make that post visible to those people. So your follower graph or social graph. And that's how social media worked for a long time. And also, you know, the dissemination of warnings on the public feeds during events. So, and this is not how social media works anymore. Instead, we've seen a shift in the last couple of years to social media algorithms determining the visibility of content, but also, of course, warnings based not on a social graph, but an interest graph. So what I mean by that is that you've probably experienced it yourself. If you get into the rabbit hole of some topic, you know, a certain type of breed of dog or whatever, all of a sudden you see more and more of this. And this is because social media algorithms determine or what they show you based on what you've viewed in the past and how you engaged with contents in the past. Now, if we translate this to a natural disaster, then typically we don't engage with such content on a regular basis, but it's a disruptive event, and social media algorithms now are developing in a way that makes it increasingly difficult for warnings to be visible in public feeds, particularly for that reason. And you know, the academic term for that is algorithmic audiencing. And yeah, I studied this throughout these 2 events that I can present to you now, and the implications that come from that. So over the past few months, my research assistant and myself, we studied ex-tropical cyclone Alfred and the mid-North Coast floods. We had different approaches for collecting data, but generally the work that we do is social media analytics. So what this means is that we collect primary data from the platforms, and for the Cyclone Alfred, we had a broader approach where we did a keyword-based tracking, so to also include community members and their posts and identify who was communicating at all. And for the mid-North Coast floods, we did a more specific account-based data collection with the emergency management agencies, the relevant ones locally, but also nationwide. And we collected all the official warning posts on the public feeds and each and every comment to them. So for the mid-North Coast floods, that ended up being 29,000 comments, which were all the comments to the warnings from the communities and the individual users. And we studied Instagram, X, and Facebook. So what we then did was we analyzed these comments and looked for patterns, but we also analyzed a little bit of the broader context. So we didn't just hide in our Excel file, but we also went to the platforms and tried to understand the context of the warnings and the platforms as the comments on each platform. And there are a couple of patterns, so I can go into them now. First, what really is happening is that due to the algorithmic audiencing, so remember the algorithm determining the visibility based on interest-based user preferences, but not in a way that we can really predict, and emergency management agencies cannot predict. We do have sort of a mechanism that we have the public feed and warnings being posted there, but we also have users increasingly leaving the public feed and retreating to group structures and spaces where agencies are not. And on the public feed, anyway, there's a divide into short form and long form contents. And if you look into the algorithms, then they also work differently. So each and every platform is, introducing a TikTok style kind of short form feed that runs differently than the original feed, for example, on Facebook. And here what we found was that warnings typically were in this long form, more classic format with lots and lots of text, static images, and not so much in the short form style. But users engaging increasingly with the short form and video feeds. So then the semi-private or even completely private groups, this is, in my opinion, or based on our observations, a direct response to the algorithmic audiencing that we see on the public feed, is because users will not see any relevant disaster information there. They will just see new content based on their past preferences, and so they look for information in their local neighborhood group or any other group that's they identify within in a certain community. And here, of course, as researchers, as well as for emergency management agencies, we only have indirect access. We don't have direct access in the sense that there is no way for a business account or an organizational account to be part of those structures. So it has to go through admins of these groups or locally connected micro-influencers and community leaders who do have or have not established a relationship with an agency, and then information and warnings can travel through to these groups. But what we found is that there are some cases where this is done more in a structured way, but oftentimes it just relies on really community leaders who are proactive and do this in their own time without any structured training or institutional backing. So then the third pattern, and this is an interesting one, is that we've observed some sort of commercialization of disaster warnings. So what I mean by that is that we ranked warning posts during the Mid-North Coast floods, and 4 out of the 5 most shared warnings and also most commented on warnings were not coming from official emergency management agencies. They were coming from a third-party platform provider. This third-party provider has many Facebook pages and a platform and an alert service that is paid, and repurposes official warnings, displays them a little bit differently than the official warning. And it turns out that users engage with these warnings a little bit better than with the official ones. So that led to the finding that community members actually engage with those more. And then we saw advertisements on those warnings for an insurance company. and leading individuals to these paid services. So this is social media doing its thing and commercializing topics, hobbies, and now disaster warnings. And this also leads to, not in this particular platform or case of this platform, but in the case of Cyclone Alfred, we had storm chasers and weather influencers who also are economically incentivized by posting warnings and sharing them widely. And it's incentivizing them to just sensationalize them a little bit more, up to the point that warnings become inaccurate, or reports of these individuals and third-party actors, because they are incentivized to do so by the platforms. And these then, of course, gain more reach than official information, which is often not as straightforward or more balanced and unclear. So that was the third pattern. So what can we do? Should we leave social media? Of course not. This is where Australians are, where they communicate. And now how can we move forward? So what we found also in official warnings and posts, what was interesting is that emergency management agencies seem to react to this development that, it's so unpredictable to get the warnings across to the right people, that there's a practice to link away from social media to crisis maps, websites, and so on, where agencies control the message. And that makes 100% sense. And there are call to actions, to subscribe to the alerts and everything. Now, I'm interested in what's going on still on the platform, of course, in this research. And if you understand a little bit how algorithms, promote and punish postings, then you know that linking users away from platforms is actually hurtful. So while linking to maps and other websites away from social media is the logical thing to do, it may happen that the warnings and the communications that happen on platform are being punished and then are becoming even less visible compared to those third-party influencers and actors that play the algorithm game. So short-form formats, we have seen quite little engagement from the official side with these formats, which is another area to explore. Identify group admins and build relationships with local influencers. These are among the points and recommendations we draw from this research. And recently I talked with a practitioner who explored direct messaging on Instagram, where we can, bypass the public feeds altogether and message locally relevant individuals directly. So, but I don't want to end on a negative note. So algorithms that, are a little bit opaque, but, work differently, it can also be a chance. So it can be a chance to reach new audiences and new demographics. We just need to figure out how to do so and work on this together. And I'm happy to have a chat later about how to do this. And thank you so much for your attention, and thanks.
Thanks very much, Julian. And can I start also really by thanking Andrew and your team and Natural Hazards Research Australia, and Julian specifically in this case for the work that you do. As has already been said, I think, by others, having end-user informed research is wonderful, but really important that we have the independence of the research, that we're not controlling aspects. And in that theme, two other aspects I think that are really important in this aspect of research, not just for ourselves in New South Wales, no doubt Queensland in the context of TC Alfred also, but us generally from an emergency services perspective. we're taught to control chaos. And I think a key message in this, in the context of research and the future context, is we've got to think differently in terms of as a control agency, and in this case in the context of warnings. Can I just briefly also just acknowledge our colleagues and friends in Marine Rescue New South Wales and the tragedy of two of our friends in New South Wales, and the tragedy of a member of the public as well, with that respect. Just a quick sort of summary in terms of clearly change is required in terms of the warnings aspect. I question myself even as an agency, I feel like I'm a distributor of warnings. Why am I a distributor of warnings? Just because I'm a control agency and I have a role in that. So I have a real question, and this is again where the research becomes really important, just in terms of challenging some of our traditional thinking. It's clear that change is required. We've all spoken about multimodal sharing of information and warnings generally, and how do we communicate and engage and all those sort of things that we know, but we are no longer the single point of truth. And that's clear in the research that is being shared. Some of our experiences, and Julian has touched on this and shared this back to us, is that we've had some of our own experiences. We tried to connect with influencers. We tried to connect with local community leaders at grassroots levels and a range of different aspects. And it's very organic. We learned lots out of that on a daily routine basis. And again, this is where the research is so important in terms of there's no one right way. And next time will be different, and the next community will be different. And when you're dealing with multiple communities, every aspect of the community and what their needing is and what the local aspects are, and what their social medias are driving, will all be different. And again, we try and control all of those aspects of diversity and saying, we need to have specific messaging for that audience and that audience and that audience. And I think we're kidding ourselves in terms of trying to control those components of it. Some key takeaways very quickly for us. The building and maintenance of those networks, and thinking about our networks really differently. They're not just networks in the context of face-to-face networks in terms of this, about social media, influencers, commercialisation. What does that look like that's a really challenging space for us. And how do we build some of those relationships before events, but also leverage the during opportunities, so during an event, and how do you be at pace, engage with these aspects in a really different way, and build the trust that you need. And again, I think there is always the aspect of, and these are conversations I've had with Jill in the recovery space in the past, is there's so many learnings in the recovery aspect of any particular event at a local level right through to organisational and state level and more systemically. The act early, act often components of it, things run at pace, and sometimes way beyond any pace that we as emergency services can really think again about control aspect. And how do we monitor that and actually have this sort of two-way aspect of communication and engagement to it. The targeting of the messaging and the cut-throughs, and I'll come back to that in just a final reflection in a moment, and engaging what's accessible now into the future. One of the really interesting bits for me in this research that triggered my thinking around this, and we're starting to step into the space of AI like everybody else, is wouldn't it be a wonderful aspect in terms of AI-generated hyper-localised warnings that actually don't require me or our emergency service organisations to be the intermediary of actual current predicted information and the warnings aspect, and that part of that AI-generated hyper-local warning system is integrated into smart systems where traffic lights go green so people can evacuate, that individual personal wearables give you certain personalised information, particularly those that are most vulnerable to aspects, and how do they actually respond in terms of preparedness and taking action. How do that switches off your household devices and cuts off the gas and cuts off the power as you're evacuating. How do we automate some of the things that we have very slow systems and wordy systems to try and communicate in terms of those aspects. So for me, those sort of aspects. And then how do you have a machine learning aspect about what the community needs at any given time in that aspect as well. So thank you again for the research. I think that's been fantastic, both for our organisation, but I think for the conversations in our sector in terms of thinking about warnings and communication in a really different way. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris Hartman from the beautiful state of Victoria.
It's beautiful.
I just want to talk about the Wi-Fi project, because one of the things, and Joe's will roll her eyes at me straight away here, but one of the things that we don't do is really, when we look at the objective for using a drop, what we don't do very well is understand how it benefits the on-ground firefighting operations, because aviation on its own is not a thing. We always think about it as a thing, it just isn't. And, you know, I think the next thing we do need to do, as well as understanding why we're doing the drop, is how does that drop support that air-to-ground integration of the on-ground activity? Because I think we need to collect that data, because if we just look at any of these things in isolation, then we're getting a skewed result. But I just wondered what your thoughts were. Lack of data, but particularly on the, you know, should we look at this as a linked aerial firefighting, on-ground firefighting perspective?
Yeah, I would agree very much. I think it's the next logical thing we have to do. But like you've sort of answered your question already.
Yeah.
We also find it very difficult to get timed and spatial information about what the ground crews were doing. I know that some of the agencies like CFA, for example, are leading the way in having GPS units on their trucks, and they've got some people in there who are trying to directly link aerial and ground crew information. But and we need to, but that's a really complicated thing to try and understand everything that was going on.
Yep. And if I can, Rob, one more. Sorry, did you want to add to that?
Only that I'd probably go beyond the operation side of things, and I suppose thinking about what's coming out of the planes, what's the impact on the environment, what's the longer term challenges that matching the aerial firefighting versus longer term mitigations that you might have in place as well.
Yep. Thanks. And for the Phoenix work, again, fantastic work, obviously. I was sponsor of that group for a while, and I loved being a part of this. So great to see that coming through. But one of the things I'm really interested in, that we talk about the cost of mental health issues for agencies becoming one of the most, it's taking over physical injury. Because generally, if somebody has a mental injury, they could be off for 3 to 5 years, may never come back. Physical injury might be 6 to 8 weeks, right? So we're seeing the cost. And I wonder again, you know, one of the things that really motivate people to get on is there's a saving to be made here. And I wonder whether we can elevate that conversation as well as part of this.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the reality is that, yeah, talking in terms of savings, I think can be helpful. Obviously, it is quite hard to put a number on it, but we also do work with various claims agencies and insurance agencies trying to look at their claims processes with a focus on those mental health ones for that exact reason, that the return to work rates are much lower. Yeah.
Jason.
Yeah, thanks. Jason Sharples, UNSW. So with the aerial firefighting, I'm aware of there's a group in France, I think, doing some research into looking at really fine detailed effects of the way the delivery system affects the drop distribution, going right down to the sort of the computational fluid dynamics details of it. Have you come across any of that research in Australia, and do you think is that something we should be looking at?
Yeah, I've had some interactions with that group, and it's a much finer scale than what we're trying to do. There's also some similar work being done in China at the moment, but yeah, it's a much finer scale than where we're at. We're sort of looking at it from the perspective of the fire, not the perspective of the plane, I guess.
But we have to get there. We might not be there now. We have to be in that place. We're going to have technology and or the ability to understand this, to be able to model things. We'll understand the fuel a lot better underneath. We'll understand longer term impacts. So if we don't need it now, it's that research there. It will pave the way for what they're doing in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time, when there's more fires and then more impact from these things, when we need everything we can in our back pockets.
I mean, I guess it comes down to sort of making the absolute best efficiency out of your resource there. I also had a question for Julian, if I could indulge. So in the aftermath, I guess, of the Victorian summer fires, I was sort of asked to respond to some social media posts out there about the pattern of fire behaviour was demonstration that the fires must have been caused by direct energy weapons, and there's been similar cases in connection with cyclones where people sort of cite glitches in the radar and things like that as sort of evidence of these things. So I mean, these sorts of social media posts really undermine public understanding of the nature of the hazard, and also soak up researchers' time. Do you have anything to comment about that?
Yes, similar observations, in particular during Alfred. So yeah, in that case, agencies really had to convince some users that was a thing. I mean, it's difficult for me to say what to do in this case, but I guess it's just it's also a way of the community that these individuals are embedded in, or the spaces that we can't observe, is where some of these conspiracies or narratives start, and from there then spread. So what we see, what we've seen in the research when we look at the public feeds, is only a very small percentage of this, and the conversations really go on WhatsApp, in Telegram groups, or in Facebook groups that we can't observe. So I can't quantify how much of this there is, but from what we've seen in the public feeds, and then think about our own way of how much we actually communicate in non-public spaces, then it has to be a lot, and needs to be addressed. But the space or the access to these spaces is limited, of course, and then it's a way of each individual. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of pre-bunking. So this has become popular during the COVID pandemic, where you expose, I guess, the public or individuals of certain narratives that are wrong, like a vaccine. And then once this narrative actually is encountered, then so many people are kind of immune that it will not spread as wide. And that is one approach that research is actually looking into at the moment, and doing that.
And I think, Rob, you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, I suppose we're in this evolution where still some of our careers are in that world where it was fax was the only channel that you had a couple of times a day, and we've opened up these channels to new communities. We've soon to have another channel through artificial intelligence that's going to put a whole range of new information that will be partly right and looks right. And I think we have to take a step now as a sector to be less about pushing and more about immersing people in really good information over all timeframes. So we're less reliant on the product placement marketing. This product is here. We're going to need them all the time, but treat them for what they are. They're basically putting product in the right place, but we have to lift the general community up through good quality, local-based community. What's the risk? What should you do? And all of those types of things. I think there's a naturally we're going to have to draw our warnings back longer and longer before the event to allow people to best respond in the right way.
Any more hands for any more questions?
Over here.
Oh, yep, sorry. Yep. Thanks, Ro.
I remember faxing through weather requests to you, actually.
He's making us all feel old.
Yeah.
Never saw get one wrong.
They were the fastest replies back in the fax days. I don't think that I could put through to my commissioner while I'm building my budget at the moment to commercialise my warnings through social media platforms, but it got me to thinking. We're modernising our alerts through mobile phone systems by doing force messaging, which is going to be fantastic uplift, and legislation around that. Should your research start to be pointing, getting us the tools that we would need to influence these social media companies to force them to be giving authoritative information through these channels and actually actively push out the junk?
Well, what is troubling is that if you ask the companies, well, can you tell us a little bit more about how your algorithms work, then they tell you, we don't know either. So yeah, they have their own kind of life inside the box and become black boxes even for the companies. I do know that platforms like Facebook are quite cooperative. They also have the crisis tab, which is well perceived. But in one of the events, I believe it was the cyclone, the search on Facebook was also down for a couple of hours, which created a lot of difficulties. Yes, always I would advocate for reaching out and speaking to each other. I'm not a legal expert in what is possible. Platforms want to protect their business model, of course, and they will not put that in danger. But I could see a case where they do so, or where they would have particular accounts like emergency management agencies. I mean, they can boost the visibility of such an account on their crisis tab or in general for a certain period of time. That's in their power. And I guess building relationships to make things like this possible would be always recommended.
I was just going to say, I think we can spend a lot of energy in trying to invest in how to better manage misinformation, disinformation, how to touch on a whole range of different aspects of the things that are emerging so quickly. I go back to Rob's point. I think that's a far more eloquent way of describing than I did in terms of immersing our business as part of a shared responsibility. And that comment's not new, but we've got to change our language and our narrative. We are picking up a US language about being first responders as emergency services. We are not the first responders. The family member, the bystander, the person next to you, the local neighbour, they're the first responders. And if you think about that in a narrative context and then you apply that to every aspect of our business, it's a very different model than we're thinking about today, including warnings and shared information. And particularly in Australia, Australians' culture, even with a changing culture and the multicultural aspect, we're pretty good at moderating, and we've got a good BS meter. And some of this misinformation, disinformation, in my experience, self-moderates itself very, very quickly with a little bit of support from us. And part of our aspect in this is maintaining the humanistic part of our business in a really different way from a front-end user, front-end agency perspective.
Thanks, Mike. Marta, did you have your hand up before? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Marta from ANU. I like to reflect a little more on the data quality aspect. We heard from Owen how the lack of data information in the drops limited the research questions you can answer, and that's a problem we have also suffered when it comes to modeling ignition probability from incident reports. So I'd like to ask the panel, what do you think is the main barrier to collect more the data? I don't think it's lack of awareness. We all know it's important, but perhaps it's lack of capability or resources in the agencies to collect more detailed information.
I have a quick answer for my own opinion, is that a lot of this stuff is about what's happening in an emergency, and the people who are responding to the emergency is the last thing on their mind to be doing good recording. And so, fair enough. If you want to get good data, we've got to have good systems that can allow that to be easily created.
You had a question just here, I think, too. Rob.
You got more answers?
Yeah.
There you go, Rob.
Oh, look, Marta, I think from what we found that there's a couple of things, like across the way our federated nation works, the focus of data collection is to deliver for a state and local area. and there's been some success in the sector in coming up with common data schemas, etc. But what we haven't done is we're still on our first generation IT systems where it is still very manual to enter the data. It's going to cost us, we're investing in harmonising 10 years of fire fatality data, and the first step of that is getting the same definition for a fire fatality in every agency. We think the US has got the right view with data collection in that they are looking at, don't collect data that you can get from somewhere else. Don't have your firefighter on the ground trying to collect something that can be either got after the event or through other sources. But it's also the carrot that we have to put out in front of people is that our individual state data is tiny compared to when you collect it as a nation, compared to when you collect it as a globe. The lithium ion problem or any number of issues that we've got, our ability to collect our data set to a health data set to another data set, the lives to be saved are huge. And it's just that it takes some investment early on, and we're trying to thread through that at the moment.
Hi, my name's Phoebe Sperry. I'm from the Australian Centre for Disease Control. I've just got a question for Alexandra and Jazz. I'm particularly interested in the applicability of the tracking and responding guidance for healthcare workers that are responding to the health impacts of climate change, particularly those that might not necessarily be seen as working in emergency services.
I can speak to it from a non-traditional sort of participant model, but it is, and I've mainly looked through the audit tool alongside, and you do it with the good practice guide, and it's really flexible. And and we've specifically put a lot of effort into making it not too emergency servicey, but to make it actually really, I think it's got. Personally, I think it's got a lot of broader implications, and it wouldn't take much to tweak it to make it fit for what you need.
Yeah, I would agree. We did, while we wanted to make sure it was fit for purpose for the group that we were working with, because it is at the level of kind of principles and example actions, and there's always a consideration of organisational context. You could certainly, I think, pick it up and look at it within healthcare settings, or I also do quite a bit of work with the rail industry, for example, and they're very interested in thinking about how they can use it as well. So, yeah, I think you could give it a go and let me know.
We got time for one more question, but I think, all good. But I think you're making a really good point, and I'll just do a wider NHRA plug here, because that's my job. What you're really talking to is that we've got a whole bunch of research that if you took the natural hazards label off is applicable to a whole bunch of things. I'm even thinking about Julian's work, next pandemic, he's going to be not talking about floods, he's going to be talking about how people are engaging in pandemic, but the application of the research, etc. as well. So I think that's a really important thing. And I know that obviously we're really conscious of that when we're talking about the benefits of our research, that it's not the folks in this room just that's benefiting, it's the broader industry that benefits from a lot of our work as well. Sue?
Sue Atkinson from the University of Canberra. I really like hearing from Julian and Mike on that work that you're doing. I guess I'd like to throw something into the mix here about we've spent a lot of money, investment, time on improving the warning systems and how they're done. So we've spent a lot of time researching that and improving it, and I think it's critical. But I think there is also quite a lot of research that shows that people don't get their information from the official sources. So most people are getting their information from multiple sources, from their friends. They're getting information from official sources, of course, but they're also collecting, sharing, validating information through their own personal networks, and this is where Julian's work on the dark social stuff is really interesting. A lot of people are not getting their information from official services. So spending a lot more money on improving warning systems is fine, but what about identifying and supporting the way that people are actually getting their information. And I think it goes to Rob's comment too about building capability in communities to be critical. So it's that media literacy, critical literacy, understanding risk better. But we want to build the capability within community to do that themselves. And they need to be able to get access to good information, but not all the information that they're looking for comes from official sources. So I just throw that up.
Yeah, I talked to a practitioner once, and she asked me about influencers, and she asked me, well, should we collaborate with a beauty influencer and brief her about warnings? Because she talks about a totally different topic. But I said, well, of course. When people, when this is a strong voice for these individuals, then they will be even more likely to listen to that person and that authority, no matter how it was built. So, yes, this is my comment. You want to?
I'd love to have a further conversation, because you're right, today's systems are based on lessons management and lessons learned, which I don't know about other people in this room. How many recommendations have you got from a lessons management system that you're trying to implement that are historical? The benefit of the research aspects are always in the context of lessons management, but in a future context. And that's how we've got to think. We've got to think about that in this context, about systems and your concept around information management. We've got an incident management system that treats information management around media, community engagement and warnings. That's not contemporary. That's not our future. That's not how information is managed. And I'm a novice at this, right? My role in this from a leadership perspective is to drive the disruption and find the capabilities and the expertise through research and other networks, and to have people in my organisation and our organisations generally that create the disruption but are looking to the future in terms of what good looks like, and it'll keep changing. But we can't operate in an environment where we're looking back over our shoulder and then 5-10 years later we've got a wonderful emergency warning system, and I believe that 3 years ago our organisation, 5 years ago, it didn't even have a warning system for effective warning system for floods and storms and other aspects. We've got all of that, including coastal and snow, but that's only got us to probably where we weren't in 2020, 2021. It's not setting us up for future success for the next season at all.
Okay, I'm going to ask all our panellists to stay up here because we're going to get a photo, but please thank all our panellists and speakers tonight. Now, before I welcome the drinks, which are about to arrive in the room any second, I also want to make a special note of Rowena Morris over in the corner. Put your hand up, Ro. So Ro is not only an amazing node research manager that we're lucky to have at NHRA, she's also the ACT New South Wales contact. So those in the ACT particularly, if you don't know Ro, make sure that you go over and introduce yourself to her this evening. One reflection on the panel and the talks tonight. You all know that I'm obsessed by this concept of being ahead of ready, and the document was great to see Jazz, by the way, put it up there. There was no prompting, I tell you. I had nothing to do with it. But, when I was thinking during Owen's, how does that research then apply into the future when we're, seeing the application in North America of the trialling of drone swarms for suppression? That might be a future question and whatnot. But yeah, then, Jazz getting up there and really thinking about the future of the workforce and how that relates to compound trauma and the, how climate change is going to change all that. I thought that was great, forward thinking and how we're going to be adopting that and the challenges of that as well. And then going to Mike's words in particular, which I thought were really seminal about what's the future of warnings, and going to some of the work that we've promoted there with Dr. Sally Potter from New Zealand around personalised warnings, the real opportunity. So one of the things I'd love you to go back, not only think about how great tonight was and the impact the research is having, but that next generation of research, how are we posing those research questions that are truly going to be transformative for our future when we know we're facing worsening natural hazard risk, and we've got to get ahead of that. And so what are the questions that are really going to transform our future 10, 20 years from now, not only just how we're going to help the next fire season, but really think about that big picture there as well. So again, thank you to everybody. I also got a reminder there that I've got to tell you that we've got to do a trial of Julian's research tonight too, and hop on to our social media accounts and follow NHRA, so on LinkedIn there as well. And while you're there, make sure you go to the NHRA website, subscribe to the newsletter, and of course, as I said before, get on and register for the forum. So thank you very much, and please join us for some refreshments.